The discrepancy between the publishing history of the Elric saga and the internal continuity of the series has always been an especially tricky hurdle encountered by its readers. Like Robert E. Howard's Conan series before it, much of the saga was published sporadically as short stories in pulp and science fiction magazines. But unlike Conan, Elric's story was conceived as a single, ongoing narrative, with the characters' circumstances and consequences carrying over from one story to the next. When these short stories were eventually published in books, they naturally took the form of collections and novellas. It wasn't until the mid-1970s that Moorcock would work on revised editions of the stories and have new books published in a definitive reading order. This had already begun with Elric of Melniboné, published in 1972 as a prequel novel to the already established series of short stories. Throughout the decade, Moorcock would compile both new and old material into a lineup of 6 books, standalone novels and fix-ups alike. It is those 6 core books that we've been focusing on for this read-along. Unfortunately, this already convoluted chronology was compounded further when Moorcock wrote more stories and novels in the following decades, all of which take place before, after, and even between the original 6 books. In fact, he's still writing them to this day. To top it all off, earlier editions of certain stories were published under completely different titles, providing many a headache for the dedicated Moorcock collectors and almost ensuring serious confusion for anyone who happens to be picking up the series for the first time. If you're a new reader who somehow came across this video without watching any of my previous Elric reviews, just know that the optimal reading order for the series is, in fact, the one established by Daw Books with their original 1970s run of the series. Any tertiary novels and short stories can be found in the more recent and very affordable omnibus editions by Saga Press, and are probably best enjoyed after you've already finished the 6 core books. I bring up the chronologically confusing nature of this series as Book 5, The Bane of the Black Sword, might be the most significant example of the saga's unruly timeline. It is a collection of 4 novelettes, all published in 1962, the year after the first Elric story was released, reworked into a fix-up novel that was published in 1977 as the 5th and penultimate book in the series, and includes the story, The Stealer of Souls, whose title was previously used for a different collection that included several unrevised short stories from Book 3 and Book 5, and was published in 1963, the same year as the first 2 stories from Stormbringer, the final book in the series, which was also published in 1977, the same year as The Bane of the Black Sword. Oh my gosh, why does everything suddenly smell like copper? At this point, I should mention that this book is my least favorite entry in the saga, not just because of the confusing timeline, but due to it being a very lopsided fix-up novel. The first of its 4 stories concludes the rivalry between Elric and the Pantangian sorcerer Theleb Karna, a story arc that began all the way back in The Weird of the White Wolf. Okay, stop me if you've heard this one. How many Melnibonéans does it take to kill a wizard? Just 1, but it will take him 3 books to do it. In this first story, The Stealer of Souls, Elric is hired by a group of corrupt merchants to assassinate their business rival. As fate would have it, the target happens to live in a freaking fortress full of armed warriors and is protected by the spells of Theleb Karna himself. To fulfill his assignment and exact his revenge, Elric enlists the help of an exiled band of Melnibonéan mercenaries, led by none other than Elric's former best friend, Divim Tavar. Yes, I know, I said that he died during the sack of Imrir in my review of Book 3. I was wrong. That was another person, another one of Elric's relatives with a similarly ridiculous fantasy name. Give me a break, okay? The story isn't all that bad, but it isn't all that good either. There's a fair bit of siege action, plenty of Elric casting spells and drinking people's souls with Stormbringer, but it just feels so by the numbers. Nothing about the story hits particularly hard, and Moorcock's prose doesn't have the same punch as it does in other Elric tales. Also, at one point, Elric is reunited with his old flame, Queen Yshanna, and the story ends with him riding off with her into the distance, set on continuing their relationship. Yet, when the next story starts up, Yshanna is nowhere to be found. I'm fully willing to accept that Elric is a bit of a womanizer who will gladly drop one woman for the next in an instant, but with the amount of emphasis that the story puts on their reunion, it felt just a bit jarring that she's gone as soon as the next story begins. The story in question is definitely my favorite from this book. Kings in Darkness is a sort of dark fairy tale that sees Elric and his sidekick Moonglum traveling in a haunted forest and eventually coming upon the kingdom of reclusive, superstitious barbarians known as Ord. The king of these gloomy savages immediately takes a disliking to Elric, and through a series of confrontations, our pasty-skinned hero ends up involving himself in a prophecy that may bring untold ancient horrors into being. The atmosphere to this tale is incredible, and it blends Moorcock's own brand of heroic fantasy with a hefty helping of mythology and a splash of gothic horror. The final confrontation between Elric and the eldritch creatures he unwittingly summons is spine-tinglingly good. My only real complaint with this one is that Moorcock, for some reason probably known only to himself, chose to shoehorn one of the most schlocky, ham-fisted romance subplots ever written into the story. While traveling through the dark, creepy forest, Elric and Moonglum rescue a wayward young woman from a mob of bandits. Afterward, they agree to escort her back to her homeland and return her to her father's court. On the way, she and Elric fall madly in love. And that's it. For real. Elric and this random princess are a couple now. They get married in the very next story. And she doesn't die. Okay, who is this man, and what did he do with the real Michael Moorcock? The next story, The Flamebringers, is, and I can't stress this enough, possibly the most forgettable fantasy story I've ever read from Michael Moorcock. All I can remember is that it begins with Elric and his new wife, Zarazenia, living all lovey-dovey in this city. Elric has hung up Stormbringer in his vault because he's sworn to never use it again, and there's a big army that's going to attack the city, so Elric does have to use Stormbringer again, and then I go all cross-eyed and my brain turns to mush, because this is the most phoning in I've ever seen Moorcock phone in. And I've read Warriors of Mars. Aside from the oddity of Elric actually settling down, getting married, and trying to put his adventuring days behind him, I feel like nothing of any real substance happens in this story. It's just kind of a side quest that has no real impact on the saga as a whole. You could probably skip reading it and head straight into Book 6 without missing anything important. The final story in the volume, To Rescue Tanelorn, is unique as it doesn't actually feature Elric at all. Instead, it focuses on Elric's old friend Rakir the Red Archer, who, if you didn't know, is basically Errol Flynn's Robin Hood if he was a lawful, neutral, Oathbreaker paladin who used to be a devotee of the gods of chaos. To all my fellow D&D fans, you're welcome for that brief extra burst of serotonin you just received. The story follows Rakir on a quest to raise an army strong enough to defend the tranquil city of Tanelorn from invading forces. To do this, he must pass through numerous extraplanar gates into other dimensions, seeking the needed reinforcements at the very edge of space and time. It's a brief, yet wonderfully psychedelic little episode, and considering that it was written in the early 60s, it's also something of an early glimpse into the kind of fantasy Moorcock would conjure up in later years, particularly the Sailor on the Seas of Fate and the entirety of the Quorum Chronicles. That said, like the Flamebringers, it feels a bit too inconsequential. Interdimensional shenanigans aside, there's not too much substance in this one, and it feels like unnecessary filler included merely to pad out the volume. All in all, while I wouldn't call Black Sword a bad book, it was certainly a bit of a disappointment for me. There are much worse fantasy books out there, some of which I've read, unfortunately, but compared to the rest of the Elric saga, it just doesn't whet my appetite the same way. For those who haven't read the book yet, I definitely wouldn't recommend skipping it entirely. I would, however, temper your expectations a bit. In my opinion, this isn't really Elric at his best. Have you ever read The Bane of the Black Sword? What do you think of it? Am I being a bit too harsh on it, maybe? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you'll join me next time for my final Elric video of the year. Until then, as always, farewell and keep reading. Okay, stop me if you've heard this one. How many Melniboneans does it take to kill a wizard? No, I'm turning into Dracula. I can't do it like that. Alright, stop me if you've heard this one. How many Melniboneans does it take to kill a wizard? Just one! But it will take him 3 books to do it!